The sound of breaking glass echoed through the small boarding house room as Victoria Reynolds swept the shattered remains of her mother's china teacup into a dustpan, her hands trembling so badly she could barely grip the wooden handle. She was 22 years old today, May 15th in the year of our Lord 1873, and she had never felt more alone in her entire life. The parlor of the boarding house in Silverton, Colorado, stood empty, except for a single cake she had baked herself that morning, its white frosting already starting to melt in the afternoon heat that filtered through the lace curtains. She had sent out invitations 3 weeks ago to everyone she knew in town, all the ladies from the church sewing circle, the women who worked at the general store, even Mrs. Patterson, who ran the millinery shop where Victoria worked 6 days a week hemming bonnets and attaching silk flowers to hat brims for $2 a week. Not a single person had come. Victoria sank into the worn velvet chair by the window and pressed her face into her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. The loneliness she had been fighting ever since her father died 2 years ago in a mining accident came crashing down on her like an avalanche rolling down the San Juan Mountains. Her mother had passed when Victoria was only 16, leaving her father as her only family, and when he died in that terrible cave-in at the Silver Queen mine, she had been left completely alone in this world. She had no siblings, no aunts or uncles, no cousins that she knew of. Just herself, and the small amount of money her father had managed to save, which was running out faster than she cared to admit. She had hoped that making friends in Silverton would ease the ache of loneliness, but the truth was that most of the women in town treated her with a cool distance she could never quite understand. Perhaps it was because she had to work for her living, or perhaps it was because she had no family connections to speak of, or perhaps they simply did not like her. Whatever the reason, she had foolishly believed that today might be different, that her invitation to tea and cake might bring people together, might make her feel less invisible in this town where she had lived for 5 years now. She had been wrong. The tears came harder now, hot and bitter, staining the collar of the blue calico dress she had pressed so carefully that morning. She had even put her hair up in a fancy style, using the tortoiseshell combs her mother had left her, and she felt like such a fool now, sitting here all dressed up with no one to see it, no one to care that she had turned another year older, no one to remind her that she mattered at all in this world. The knock at the door was so unexpected that Victoria actually jumped, her heart hammering in her chest. For a moment, wild hope surged through her. Perhaps someone had come after all. Perhaps Mrs. Patterson had simply been delayed, or perhaps one of the church ladies had reconsidered. She wiped at her eyes frantically, trying to compose herself, and called out in a voice that shook only slightly, "Just a moment, please." She crossed the small parlor quickly, checking her reflection in the mirror by the door. Her eyes were red and swollen, her nose pink from crying, but there was nothing to be done about it now. She smoothed down her dress, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The man standing on the other side was not anyone she had invited. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorframe and a weathered face that spoke of long days under the Colorado sun. He wore typical cowboy attire, dark trousers tucked into scuffed leather boots, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, and a worn leather vest. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the temples, and his eyes were the most unusual shade of green she had ever seen, like new grass after a spring rain. He was holding something in his hands, a box of some kind, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Miss Reynolds," he said, his voice deep and rough around the edges, the kind of voice that suggested he was more accustomed to talking to horses than to people. "Yes," Victoria managed, thoroughly confused now. She did not know this man, had never seen him before in her life. "Can I help you?" "Name is Kane Sutherland," he said, and she noticed he seemed almost nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I know you do not know me, but I was hoping I might come in for a moment. I have something for you." Victoria's first instinct was to refuse. A young woman did not invite strange men into her home, especially not when she was alone. But something in his face stopped her, a gentleness in those green eyes that did not match his rough exterior, and before she quite knew what she was doing, she stepped back and gestured for him to enter. "Thank you," he said, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His eyes immediately went to the cake sitting on the table, to the empty chairs arranged around the room, to the teacups set out for guests who had never arrived. She saw understanding dawn in his expression, followed by something that looked almost like anger, though she could not imagine why this stranger would be angry on her behalf. "I heard in town that today was your birthday," Kane said quietly, setting his hat on the small table by the door. "I heard that you had invited folks over for a party." Victoria felt heat flood her cheeks. The humiliation of it was so much worse knowing that people were talking about it, that this stranger knew she had been stood up by an entire town. "I see the gossip in Silverton is as efficient as ever," she said, trying to keep her voice light and failing miserably. "I also heard," Kane continued, as if she had not spoken, "that you are one of the kindest people in this town, that you visit old Mrs. Chen every week to bring her groceries even though she cannot pay you, that you mended Johnny Patterson's torn jacket for free when his ma could not afford it, and that you once gave your own lunch to a hungry prospector who had not eaten in 3 days. Victoria stared at him, completely taken aback. "How do you know all that?" "I have been working at the Silver Queen mine for the past month," Kane said. "I am new to Silverton, and I have been paying attention, trying to learn who the good people are and who are not worth my time. Your name came up more than once, always in a good way, always with respect. So when I heard that no one had shown up to your birthday party, I got angry, real angry, because it seemed to me that a town that would treat a good woman like that did not deserve her." He lifted the box he had been holding, and Victoria saw now that it was not a box at all, but a cake, obviously purchased from the bakery on Main Street. It was smaller than the one she had made, but it was beautifully decorated with pink frosting, roses, and delicate green leaves, the kind of professional decoration she could never have managed herself. "I know it is presumptuous of me to show up uninvited," Kane said, and she could hear the nervousness in his voice again. "But I could not stand the thought of you spending your birthday alone. So I bought this cake, and I came here, and I am hoping you might let me stay for a while, if only so you can have at least one person help you celebrate." Victoria felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, but these were different from the bitter ones she had shed earlier. These were tears of gratitude, of surprise, of something warm and overwhelming that she could not quite name. "You bought me a cake," she whispered. "I did," Kane confirmed. "And if you will let me, I would like to share it with you and wish you a happy birthday proper." She should have said no. She should have thanked him politely and sent him on his way, because this was highly improper, and if anyone saw a strange man in her boarding house room, it would ruin what little reputation she had left. But Victoria found herself nodding, found herself stepping back to let him in further, found herself gesturing to the table where her own homemade cake sat alongside the empty teacups. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "Thank you, Mr. Sutherland." "Kane," he corrected, setting the bakery cake down on the table next to hers. "Please call me Kane." "Then you must call me Victoria," she replied, and for the first time all day she felt herself smile. They sat down at the table together, this strange cowboy and the lonely young woman, and Victoria poured tea into 2 of the cups she had set out. Her hands were steadier now, and as she handed Kane his cup, their fingers brushed for just a moment. The contact sent a strange jolt through her, something electric and unexpected, and from the way his eyes widened slightly, she thought perhaps he had felt it too. "I should cut the cake," Victoria said, needing to do something with her hands, needing to break the sudden tension that had filled the room. "Both of them," Kane said with a small smile. "You made yours yourself, I am guessing." "I did," Victoria admitted. "I am not much of a baker, I am afraid. It probably does not taste very good." "I am sure it tastes fine," Kane said firmly. "And even if it does not, I want to try it. You put work into it, and that matters." They cut both cakes, serving each other slices of both, and as they ate, they began to talk. Victoria learned that Kane was originally from Texas, that he had worked cattle drives for years before deciding he wanted something more stable, something that did not involve months on the trail sleeping under the stars and eating nothing but beans and hardtack. He had heard the mines in Colorado were hiring and paying decent wages, so he had made his way north and found work at the Silver Queen. "It is dangerous work," Kane admitted, taking a bite of Victoria's homemade cake. His face registered surprise. "This is actually really good." "What made you think you could not bake?" Victoria felt herself flush with pleasure. "My mother was an excellent baker. Everything I make seems poor in comparison." "Well, your mother must have been exceptional then, because this is delicious," Kane said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe him. She found herself telling him about her parents, about losing them both, about the loneliness that had become her constant companion. She told him things she had never told anyone else in Silverton, perhaps because he was a stranger and it felt safe, or perhaps because there was something in his eyes that invited confidence. Kane listened without interruption, his full attention on her, and Victoria could not remember the last time someone had truly listened to her like this, as if her words mattered, as if she mattered. "That is a heavy burden to carry alone," Kane said quietly when she finished. "I am sorry you have had to bear it." "Everyone loses people," Victoria said, trying to sound philosophical about it. "I am not special in that regard." "Maybe not," Kane agreed, "but that does not make your grief any less real or any less worthy of acknowledgement." They talked for hours, the afternoon sun slowly shifting into evening. Kane told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the brother he had lost to fever when they were both children. He spoke about the loneliness of the cattle trails, about the way a man could be surrounded by dozens of others and still feel completely alone. "I know what it is like to feel invisible," Kane said, his green eyes meeting hers across the table. "To feel like you could disappear and no one would notice or care. It is a terrible feeling, and I would not wish it on anyone, least of all someone like you." "You barely know me," Victoria pointed out, though there was no heat in her words. "I know enough," Kane said firmly. "I know that you are kind, that you work hard, that you take care of others even when no one takes care of you. I know that you deserve better than what this town has given you." The intensity in his voice, in his gaze, made Victoria's breath catch. She looked down at her teacup, suddenly shy, suddenly aware of how intimate this felt, sitting here alone with this man she had only just met. "I should not keep you any longer," Victoria said quietly, though part of her wanted him to stay, wanted to keep talking to him until the sun came up again. "It is getting late, and people will talk if they see you leaving here after dark." Kane nodded slowly, though she thought she saw a disappointment flicker across his face. You are right, of course, but before I go, there is one more thing I need to do. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small box, and Victoria's heart began to pound so hard she was certain he could hear it. The box was made of worn velvet, dark blue and slightly faded, the kind of box that held something precious. I know this is going to seem crazy, Kane said, his voice steady despite the wild nature of what he was about to say. I know we just met, and I know I have no right to ask this of you. But I have been in Silverton for a month now, and in that month I have watched you. Not in a strange way, he added quickly, seeing her eyes widen. But I have noticed you. I have seen you walking to work every morning, always with a smile for anyone you pass. I have seen you helping Mrs. Chen with her groceries, seen you being kind to people who do not deserve your kindness. I asked about you, learned your name, learned your story. And the more I learned, the more I found myself thinking about you, wondering about you, wanting to know you. He opened the box, and nestled inside was a simple gold ring with a small but perfect diamond, the kind of ring a working man might save months to afford. I know this is insane, Kane continued, his eyes never leaving hers. I know people do not do things like this, that you are supposed to court a woman properly for months or years before you even think about marriage. But I also know that life is short, Victoria. I know that tomorrow is not promised. I lost my brother when I was 10 years old, and it taught me that waiting for the perfect moment is foolish because the perfect moment might never come. When I heard that no one had shown up for your birthday, when I realized that you were sitting here all alone, I knew I had to do something. I could not let this day pass without you knowing that someone sees you, that someone values you, that someone thinks you are worth celebrating. Victoria could hardly breathe. Her mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, trying to make sense of this surreal moment. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Kane said quickly. I'm not even asking you to say yes right now. What I am asking is for you to consider it. To consider giving me a chance to court you properly, to get to know me as I want to get to know you, and to keep this ring as a promise that my intentions are serious and honorable. If, after spending time with me, you decide you do not want to marry me, I will accept that and walk away. But if you think there might be a chance, even a small one, that we could build something together, then I am asking you to take that chance with me. Victoria stared at the ring, her thoughts a chaotic whirl. This was madness. You did not accept marriage proposals from men you had just met, even if they came with the caveat of courtship first. It went against everything she had been taught about propriety and sense and rational behavior. But then again, what had propriety and sense gotten her? A lonely room and a birthday spent crying because an entire town could not be bothered to show her a single kindness. This man, this stranger, had shown her more genuine care and consideration in a few hours than anyone in Silverton had shown her in 5 years. Why? Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this for someone you do not even know? Kane was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with an honesty that took her breath away. Because from the moment I first saw you, something in my chest felt different. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the kind of foolish romanticism that gets people into trouble. But I have been alive for 26 years, Victoria, and I have never felt about anyone the way I felt watching you walk down the street with the morning sun in your hair. I have never wanted to know someone the way I want to know you. And when I heard about today, about your birthday, I realized I could not let another day pass without at least trying. Even if you say no, even if you send me away and never want to see me again, at least I will know I tried. At least I will know I did not let fear or convention keep me from reaching for something that might be extraordinary. Victoria felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but she was not crying from sadness now. She was crying because no one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way Kane was looking at her now, like she was something precious and rare and worth fighting for. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say you will think about it," Kane said gently. "Say you will let me court you, let me prove that I mean what I say. That is all I am asking." Victoria looked down at the ring again, at the way it caught the lamplight and threw tiny rainbows across the tablecloth. She thought about her empty room, her lonely life, the years stretching ahead of her with nothing but work and silence. She thought about the way Kane had listened to her, really listened, the way he had seen her pain and cared about it. She thought about the electricity she had felt when their hands touched, the warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled. It was madness. It was impulsive and wild and completely unlike her, but perhaps that was exactly why she should say yes. "I will think about it," Victoria said softly, and then, before she could lose her courage, she added, "But I do not need much time. You can court me, Kane Sutherland. You can try to prove that this feeling between us is real and not just the madness of a lonely birthday and a kind gesture. And I will keep this ring, not on my finger yet, but somewhere safe, as a reminder of the most surprising day of my life." The smile that broke across Kane's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, bright and warm and full of such genuine joy that Victoria found herself smiling back just as widely. "Thank you," Kane said, and she could hear the emotion thick in his voice. "You will not regret this, Victoria. I promise you that." He stood then, carefully taking the ring from the box and placing it in her palm, closing her fingers around it gently. His hand was warm and calloused from hard work, and Victoria found she did not want him to let go. But propriety demanded he leave now, before full dark, before her reputation was damaged beyond repair. Kane seemed to understand this without her having to say it, and he reluctantly released her hand and reached for his hat. "May I call on you tomorrow evening?" Kane asked as he moved toward the door. "Perhaps we could take a walk if the weather is fine." "I would like that," Victoria said, following him to the door. "I finish work at the millinery at 6 o'clock. Then I will meet you there at 6, Kane promised. He paused in the doorway, looking back at her with those remarkable green eyes. "Happy birthday, Victoria Reynolds. I am glad I got to spend it with you." "So am I," Victoria said honestly. "Thank you for the cake and for everything else." Kane nodded, settling his hat on his head, and then he was gone, his boots echoing on the stairs as he made his way out of the boarding house. Victoria closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding, the ring clutched tight in her hand. She opened her palm and looked at it again, at the simple gold band and the modest diamond. It was beautiful, and more than that, it was a promise. A promise that she was seen, that she was valued, that she was not alone in this world. Victoria walked to her bedroom and found the small wooden box where she kept her mother's few pieces of jewelry. She placed the ring inside carefully, reverently, and then she returned to the parlor to clean up the remnants of her birthday celebration. As she worked, putting away teacups and wrapping up leftover cake, Victoria found herself humming. She could not remember the last time she had hummed while doing chores, could not remember the last time she had felt this lightness in her chest, this flutter of anticipation for tomorrow. The next day at work seemed to drag on forever. Victoria's fingers moved automatically through the familiar motions of sewing ribbon onto bonnet brims and attaching decorative flowers to hat bands, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying every moment of the previous evening, every word Kane had said, every look he had given her, Mrs. Patterson, the owner of the millinery, noticed her distraction. "You are in a strange mood today, Victoria," the older woman observed, peering at her over the top of her spectacles. "Did something happen?" Victoria considered telling her about Kane, about the cake and the ring, and the unexpected turn her birthday had taken. But some instinct told her to keep it private for now, to hold this precious new thing close to her heart until she was sure it was real. "Just a pleasant birthday evening," Victoria said carefully. "Better than I expected." Mrs. Patterson raised her eyebrows but did not press further, and Victoria was grateful. She was not ready to share this yet, was not ready to expose her fragile hope to the potential criticism and gossip of Silverton society. The clock seemed to move backward rather than forward, but finally, blessedly, 6 o'clock arrived. Victoria removed her work apron, smoothed down her skirt, and stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk in front of the millinery shop. Kane was already there, leaning against the post that supported the awning, his hat tipped low over his eyes. When he saw her, he straightened immediately, a smile crossing his weathered face. "Right on time," he observed, offering her his arm. Victoria took it, acutely aware of the curious looks from passers-by. Silverton was a small town, and any deviation from the normal routine was noticed and remarked upon. She could already imagine the conversations that would take place over dinner tables tonight, the speculation about who this man was, and what Victoria Reynolds was doing walking out with him. But for once she did not care. Let them talk. Let them wonder. She had spent 5 years trying to fit in, trying to make friends, trying to be the kind of woman this town would accept, and where had it gotten her? An empty room and a birthday spent alone. If taking a walk with a handsome cowboy who actually seemed to care about her was scandalous, then so be it. "Where would you like to walk?" Kane asked as they moved down the sidewalk together. "There is a path along the creek, just outside of town," Victoria suggested. "It is pretty this time of year, with all the wildflowers blooming." "Sounds perfect," Kane agreed. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, leaving the bustle of Main Street behind and following a narrow dirt path that led down to Cement Creek. The sound of rushing water filled the air, and the banks were indeed covered in wildflowers, purple lupines and yellow buttercups and delicate white columbines. "It is beautiful here," Kane said, looking around appreciatively. "Different from Texas, greener, more mountains. Do you miss it? Texas?" Victoria asked. Kane considered the question seriously. "I miss some things. The sky there is different, bigger somehow, and I miss my family's ranch, even though it belongs to my older brother now. But no, I do not regret leaving." Sometimes you have to leave behind what is familiar to find what you are really looking for. "And what are you looking for?" Victoria asked quietly. Kane stopped walking and turned to face her, his green eyes intense in the golden evening light. "I think I might have found it," he said simply. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she did not look away. "You barely know me," she said, not for the first time. "Then help me know you better," Kane replied. "Tell me things. Tell me what you dream about, what you want from life, what makes you happy." They started walking again, and Victoria found herself opening up in a way she rarely did. She told him about her love of reading, about the small collection of books she had inherited from her mother, and how she read them over and over because she could not afford to buy new ones. She told him about her secret desire to someday have a real home, not just a rented room in a boarding house, but a place that was truly hers with a garden and a kitchen and rooms filled with light. "I want to matter to someone," Victoria admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I want to wake up in the morning and know that there is at least one person in the world who would notice if I was gone, who would care." "Is that selfish?" "No," Kane said firmly. "That is human. We all want to be seen, to be valued. There is nothing wrong with that." He told her more about his own past, about the years spent on cattle drives, about the loneliness of that life. "You spend all day with men," Kane explained, "but you do not really connect with them, not in any meaningful way. You talk about the weather and the cattle and where the next water source is, but you do not talk about the things that matter. You do not talk about your fears or your dreams or what keeps you awake at night. After a while, you start to feel like you are disappearing, like you are becoming less of a person and more just a function, just a pair of hands to move cattle from one place to another." "Is that why you took the mining job?" Victoria asked. "To feel more human?" "Partly," Kane admitted. "And partly because I was tired of never staying in one place long enough to build anything real. I wanted roots. I wanted a community. I wanted the possibility of a future that looked like something more than an endless series of identical days." They walked and talked until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Kane was easy to talk to, easy to be with, and Victoria found herself relaxing in a way she had not realized she needed. There was no judgment in his eyes when she spoke, no sense that he was merely tolerating her presence or waiting for her to stop talking so he could leave. As they made their way back toward town, Kane said, "I know I am supposed to court you slowly, to take my time and do things properly. But I need you to know something, Victoria. I meant what I said last night. I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, and every moment I spend with you only confirms what I already knew. I am going to marry you if you will have me. Maybe not tomorrow or next week, but someday. I am as sure of that as I am of my own name." Victoria stopped walking, her heart racing. The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, should have frightened her. It was too much too fast, too intense for a woman who prided herself on being sensible and practical. But it did not frighten her. Instead, it filled her with a warmth that started in her chest and spread outward until she felt it all the way to her fingertips. "I believe you," Victoria said softly. "I do not know why, but I do." Kane smiled, and in the fading light, he looked almost boyish despite his weathered features. "Good, because I always keep my promises." He walked her back to the boarding house, leaving her at the door with a tip of his hat and a promise to see her again soon. Victoria climbed the stairs to her room feeling like she was walking on air, and when she opened her jewelry box to look at the ring before bed, she found herself smiling. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Victoria had experienced before. Kane called on her nearly every evening after work, and they would walk together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories about his childhood in Texas, about learning to rope cattle and break horses, about the time his brother had dared him to ride a particularly ornery bull, and he had ended up with a broken arm, and a valuable lesson about knowing his limits. Victoria told him about her mother's garden back in Missouri, before they had moved to Colorado, about the roses her mother had tended so carefully, and how Victoria could still remember their scent on summer evenings. She told him about her father, about how he had been a dreamer who always believed the next mine would be the one to make them rich, and how that dream had ultimately killed him. "You resent him for it?" Kane asked one evening as they sat by the creek, watching the water rush past. "For chasing a dream that cost him his life." Victoria thought about it carefully. "No," she said finally. "I wish he had been more careful, wish he had valued his safety more than the promise of gold, but I cannot resent him for having dreams. What kind of life would it be without them?" "A very gray one," Kane agreed. 3 weeks into their courtship, Kane invited Victoria to have dinner with him at the hotel restaurant, a fancier establishment than she would normally frequent. She wore her best dress, a dark green cotton with black trim that her mother had made for her years ago, and she put her hair up with the tortoiseshell combs. When Kane saw her, his eyes widened. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe him. Over dinner, roast chicken and potatoes and fresh bread that was still warm from the oven, Kane told her about a letter he had received from his brother in Texas. "He says the ranch is doing well, that cattle prices are good this year," Kane said, cutting into his chicken. "He asked when I was planning to come home." Victoria felt her stomach drop. "Are you planning to go home?" Kane reached across the table and took her hand, right there in front of everyone in the restaurant. "No," he said firmly. "I told him I have found something more valuable than anything waiting for me in Texas. I told him I am building a life here in Colorado, and that I hope very much that life will include a wife soon." Victoria's breath caught. "Kane." "I know we have only been courting a few weeks," Kane said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "But I have not changed my mind about anything I said that first night. If anything, I am more certain now than I was then. I love you, Victoria Reynolds. I love your kindness and your strength, and the way you see the good in people even when they do not deserve it. I love the way you laugh and the way you think about things carefully before you speak. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day." Tears sprang to Victoria's eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way Kane was looking at her now, like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I love you too," Victoria whispered, the words coming easily because they were true. Somewhere between that first surprising birthday evening and now, she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with this cowboy who had shown up with a cake when no one else had cared. Kane's smile was brilliant. "Then marry me. Not someday, not eventually, but soon. Next week if you are willing. I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not care about any of that. I just want to start our life together, want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep beside you every night. Say yes, Victoria. Please say yes." Victoria thought about all the reasons she should say no, should insist on a longer courtship, should be sensible and practical. But none of those reasons seemed to matter when weighed against the feeling in her chest, the absolute certainty that this was right, that Kane was right, that they were right together. "Yes," Victoria said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Kane Sutherland." Kane stood up so abruptly his chair nearly tipped over, and before Victoria quite knew what was happening, he had pulled her to her feet and was kissing her, right there in the middle of the hotel restaurant with everyone watching. It was her first kiss, and it was perfect, his lips warm and gentle against hers, his hands cradling her face like she was something infinitely fragile and valuable. When they finally broke apart, the entire restaurant was staring at them, but Victoria found she did not care at all. Kane pulled the ring from his vest pocket, the same ring he had shown her that first night, and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "I have been carrying this with me every day," Kane admitted, "hoping for the moment I could put it where it belongs." They were married the following Saturday in a small ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Chen as one witness and a minor Kane worked with named Robert as the other. Mrs. Patterson from the millinery shop came as well, looking surprised but pleased, and a handful of other townspeople who seemed curious about this whirlwind romance. Victoria wore the same green dress she had worn to dinner, and Kane wore his best clothes, his dark trousers pressed, and his white shirt crisp and clean. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Kane kissed her again, Victoria felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They had rented a small house on the edge of town, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it felt like a palace to Victoria. It was theirs, a place that belonged to them, where they could build a life together. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Kane patient with her inexperience, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Victoria felt a peace she had never known before. This was what she had been missing, what she had been longing for without quite knowing it. Not just someone to share her life with, but someone who saw her, really saw her, and loved what he found. The months that followed were the happiest of Victoria's life. She continued working at the millinery shop, at least for a while, and Kane worked at the mine. They fell into an easy rhythm, waking early to have breakfast together before Kane left for his shift, reuniting in the evenings to make dinner and talk about their days. Kane was different from other men Victoria had known. He did not expect her to wait on him hand and foot, or to keep silent about her opinions. He asked what she thought about things, listened when she spoke, helped with household chores without being asked. He made her laugh with his stories and held her when she cried on the anniversary of her father's death. 6 months into their marriage, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, had noticed the changes in her body, the morning sickness, the way certain smells made her nauseous. But it was not until the doctor confirmed it that it felt real. She was nervous about telling Kane, worried that it was too soon, that they were not ready for a child yet. But when she finally worked up the courage to share the news over dinner, Kane's reaction dissolved all her fears. He stood up from the table, pulled her into his arms, and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he kept saying, his voice choked with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Victoria asked, even though she could feel his joy radiating through his embrace. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Kane said, pulling back to look at her with eyes that were suspiciously bright. "You have given me everything, Victoria. A home, a purpose, a reason to wake up excited every morning, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve all this, but I promise I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of it." The pregnancy was not easy. Victoria suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and as she grew larger, her back ached constantly and she could barely sleep. But Kane was attentive and caring, rubbing her feet when they swelled, helping her in and out of bed, making sure she ate even when she had no appetite. He also began talking to her stomach, telling their unborn child stories about Texas and Cattle Drive, and all the things they would do together when the baby was old enough. Victoria would lie in bed, watching her husband's face as he spoke to her belly, and feel so much love she thought she might drown in it. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1874, after a long and difficult labor. Kane stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, ignoring the doctor's suggestion that he wait outside like most husbands did. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect, the doctor placed him in Victoria's arms, and she felt a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. Kane leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face, and touched one finger to their son's tiny hand. "He is perfect," Kane whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Kane's father, and from the moment he entered the world, he became the center of theirs. Kane was a natural father, patient and loving, happy to wake in the middle of the night to help with feedings, content to spend hours just holding his son and marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. Victoria left her job at the millinery shop to focus on caring for Thomas, and though she sometimes missed the work and the small income it provided, she could not regret the decision. Watching her son grow, seeing the bond between Kane and Thomas strengthen every day, was worth more than any wage. When Thomas was 6 months old, Kane came home from the mine with news. "I have been thinking," he said, settling into his chair after dinner while Victoria nursed the baby. "The mine is good work and the pay is decent, but it is dangerous. You know that as well as anyone." Victoria did know. She had lost her father to the mines, had lived with the constant fear that the same thing might happen to Kane. Every day he went underground was a day she spent worrying he might not come back. "I have been saving money," Kane continued. "Every extra penny from my wages I have put aside. And I think I have enough now to buy some land outside town, maybe start a small cattle operation. Nothing big at first, just a few head, but something we could build on. Something safer than the mines, something Thomas could grow up helping with." Victoria's heart leapt at the idea. "You want to be a rancher again?" "I want to build something that is ours," Kane said. "Something we can pass down to our children, something that will last beyond our lifetimes. What do you think?" "I think it sounds wonderful," Victoria said honestly. "But are you sure we can afford it?" "We will have to be careful," Kane admitted. "Money will be tight at first, probably for a while, but I am not afraid of hard work, and I know you are not either. We can do this, Victoria. I know we can." Within a month, Kane had purchased 50 acres of land about 5 miles outside Silverton, along with 10 head of cattle and a half-broken horse to work them. The property came with a small cabin, rough and in need of repair but livable, and they moved out of their little house in town with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The first year of ranching was brutally hard. Kane worked from before dawn until after dark, building fences, repairing the cabin, tending the cattle. Victoria worked just as hard, maintaining their home, caring for Thomas, helping with the livestock when she could. Money was even tighter than Kane had predicted, and there were nights when they ate nothing but beans and cornbread because that was all they could afford. But they were happy. They were building something together, something real and lasting. And even on the hardest days, when Kane came home exhausted and covered in dirt, and they counted their meager coins and wondered how they would make it through another month, they had each other and Thomas, and that felt like enough. Slowly, painfully, the ranch began to thrive. Kane proved to have a gift for raising cattle, and their herd grew steadily. He hired a hand to help with the work when they could afford it, a young man named Peter who was learning the trade. Victoria started a vegetable garden and sold the excess produce in town, bringing in a small but helpful additional income. By the time Thomas was 3 years old, they were doing well enough that Kane built an addition onto the cabin, adding 2 bedrooms and a proper dining room. Victoria cried the day the work was finished, overwhelmed with gratitude for how far they had come. "From a lonely boarding house room to this," she said, standing in the doorway and looking at the home they had built together. "Sometimes I can barely believe it is real." Kane wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "It is real. Everything we have, everything we have built, it is all real. And it all started because I could not stand the thought of you spending your birthday alone." Victoria turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had changed her entire life. His face was more weathered now, lined from long days in the sun, and there were threads of silver starting to appear in his dark hair. But his green eyes were the same, still looking at her with that mixture of love and wonder that made her feel like the most important person in the world. "Best birthday present I ever received," Victoria said softly, rising on her toes to kiss him. They had 2 more children over the years, a daughter named Sarah when Thomas was 4, and another son named James 2 years after that. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the more successful operations in the area. Kane's reputation as an honest cattleman spread, and he began to be consulted by other ranchers about breeding and herd management. Victoria found her own fulfillment in their growing family and in the community she built around them. She hosted gatherings at the ranch, brought meals to new mothers in town, organized a lending library so families could share books. The same women who had not come to her birthday party all those years ago now sought her company, but Victoria found she had let go of that old hurt. She had everything she needed right here on this ranch, with this man and these children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kane surprised her with a trip back into Silverton for dinner at the hotel restaurant, the same place where he had proposed marriage all those years ago. Mrs. Chen agreed to watch the children for the evening, and Victoria wore a new dress that Kane had bought for her, a beautiful blue silk that made her feel like a young woman again. Over dinner, Kane reached across the table and took her hand, just like he had done a decade before. 10 years, he said wonderingly. 10 years since I did the craziest thing I ever did and showed up at your door with a cake and a ring. The best crazy thing you ever did, Victoria corrected with a smile. No regrets, Kane asked, though there was no real doubt in his voice. Not a single one, Victoria said firmly. You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I felt unlovable. You changed my entire life, Kane. We changed each other's lives, Kane said. I was just as lost as you were, just as lonely. We found each other exactly when we needed to. They talked long into the evening, reminiscing about their early days together, laughing about the mistakes they had made learning to ranch, marveling at how much their children had grown. When they finally headed home, riding in their wagon under a sky full of stars, Victoria leaned against Kane's shoulder and felt nothing but contentment. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to follow in his father's footsteps. Sarah was spirited and clever, always asking questions and wanting to know how things worked. Young James was gentle and thoughtful, happiest when he was drawing pictures or reading books. Kane taught Thomas everything he knew about ranching, taking him out to check on cattle and mend fences, showing him how to read the weather and judge the quality of grazing land. Victoria taught Sarah to cook and sew, though her daughter was far more interested in learning to ride and rope than in domestic arts. James loved both his parents equally, but spent most of his time following Victoria around, helping her in the garden and learning to read from her extensive collection of books. In 1886, when Thomas was 12 and already talking about taking over the ranch someday, tragedy struck in the form of a terrible winter. The snow came early and stayed late, and the temperatures dropped lower than anyone could remember. Cattle froze in the fields despite Kane's best efforts to shelter them, and by the time spring finally arrived, they had lost nearly half their herd. It was devastating financially and emotionally. Kane blamed himself, convinced he should have done more, should have seen the signs and prepared better. Victoria held him when he cried for the first time since their son was born, whispering reassurances and reminding him that they had survived hard times before and would survive them again. They rebuilt slowly, taking on debt to buy new cattle, working even harder than they had in those early years. Thomas stepped up, taking on more responsibility, working alongside his father from dawn to dusk. Even Sarah and James helped however they could, tending the chickens and the garden, doing chores without being asked. Within 3 years, they had recovered most of what they lost, and Kane's face lost the haunted look it had carried through that terrible winter. He was older now, his hair more silver than dark, his movements a little slower than they used to be. But he was still strong, still determined, still the man who had shown up at a lonely woman's door with a cake and a promise. Victoria aged as well, her dark hair threading with gray, fine lines appearing at the corners of her eyes and mouth. But Kane still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, still reached for her hand when they sat together in the evenings, still told her he loved her every single day. In 1890, when Thomas was 16, he asked his parents' permission to court a girl from town, the daughter of the baker. Her name was Emma, and she was sweet and kind and completely smitten with the tall, serious rancher's son. Kane and Victoria gave their blessing, and 2 years later, they stood proudly as Thomas and Emma were married in the same church where Victoria and Kane had exchanged vows so many years before. Thomas built a house on the far end of the ranch property, and soon Emma was pregnant with their first child. The cycle continued, life renewing itself, and Victoria found herself overcome with emotion the day her first grandchild was born, a little girl they named Victoria in her honor. Sarah, true to her independent spirit, announced at 18 that she wanted to become a teacher rather than get married, and she left for Denver to attend a teaching college. It was hard for Victoria to see her daughter go, but she was proud of Sarah's determination to make her own path. James, quiet and artistic, showed no interest in ranching but developed a talent for drawing that caught the attention of a visiting artist who encouraged him to pursue formal training. When he was 19, he left for San Francisco to study art, and though Victoria missed him terribly, she was glad her children felt free to chase their dreams. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's increasingly capable management, and Kane was able to step back from the day-to-day operations, content to serve as an advisor and to spend more time with Victoria. They took long walks in the evenings like they used to when they were courting, talking about their children and grandchildren, about the life they had built, about how grateful they were for every moment they had been given. On Victoria's 50th birthday in 1899, Kane surprised her with a party. Unlike that terrible birthday so many years ago, this one was filled with people, family and friends who had come to celebrate her. Thomas and Emma were there with their 3 children. Sarah had come home from Denver where she was now teaching at a girls' school, and James had traveled from San Francisco with a portfolio of his paintings that made Victoria cry with pride. As Victoria looked around the room at all these people who loved her, who had taken time from their lives to be here for her, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Her life had turned out so differently than she could have imagined sitting alone in that boarding house room 26 years ago. After everyone else had left, after the children and grandchildren had gone home and it was just Victoria and Kane sitting together in the gathering dusk, Kane took her hand. "You remember what I told you that first night?" he asked. "When I showed up with a cake." "You said a lot of things that night," Victoria said with a smile. "Which part are you thinking of?" "I told you that life is short, that tomorrow is not promised, that waiting for the perfect moment is foolish because it might never come," Kane said. "I still believe that, Victoria. Every day with you has been a gift, and I have never once regretted taking that leap of faith, showing up at your door like a madman with a ring for a woman I barely knew." "Neither have I," Victoria said softly. "You saved me that day, Kane, not just from loneliness, but from a life half lived. You taught me that love is worth the risk, that opening your heart even when you are afraid is the bravest thing a person can do." Kane stood, pulling Victoria to her feet, and they danced together slowly in the living room of their home, No music except the sound of their own breathing and the beating of their hearts. As Victoria rested her head against Kane's chest, feeling his arms strong around her, she thought about that young woman she had been, crying in an empty room because no one had come to her birthday. That woman had been so lost, so desperately lonely, so convinced she did not matter to anyone. If she could go back and tell that woman anything, it would be this: hold on. Wait just a little longer. Because the best thing in your life, the most important moment, is just about to knock on your door. And when it does, when that cowboy shows up with a cake and a ring and a heart full of love he is ready to give you, be brave enough to say yes. Be brave enough to take the chance. Be brave enough to believe that you deserve to be happy. Because you do. You deserve all of it, every beautiful moment that is coming your way. The years continued to pass gently, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the growing family that surrounded them. Kane and Victoria watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated Thomas and Emma's 10th wedding anniversary, welcomed Sarah home with a man she had met in Denver, a fellow teacher named Richard who treated her with respect and kindness. James returned from San Francisco with a gallery showing his work, and though he chose to stay in California, he visited often, always bringing new paintings for his parents' walls. In the spring of 1903, Kane and Victoria celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a gathering that filled their ranch house to bursting. All three of their children were there with their families, and Kane stood before everyone to make a toast. 30 years ago, I did the most impulsive thing I had ever done, Kane said, his voice still strong despite his 61 years. I showed up at the door of a woman I did not know, carrying a cake and a ring, and I asked her to take a chance on me. I expected her to say no. I expected her to think I was insane. But she did not. She said yes, and in doing so, she gave me the only life worth living. Everything good in my world, everything I value, everything I am grateful for. It all traces back to that moment when Victoria Reynolds was brave enough to open her door and let a crazy cowboy into her life. He turned to Victoria, his green eyes still as vibrant as they had been 3 decades ago, still looking at her with that same mixture of love and wonder. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria Sutherland. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every moment, every struggle, every joy. All of it exactly the same as long as it meant I got to spend my life with you. Victoria stood, tears streaming down her face, and crossed to her husband. She took his weathered hands in hers and said, I would too. Every moment, every choice, every risk, all of it worth it because it brought me you. They kissed then, these two people who had built a life from nothing more than a moment of compassion and a leap of faith, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. That night, lying in bed in the darkness, Kane reached for Victoria's hand like he had done every night for 30 years. I am getting old, he said quietly. My joints ache in the morning and I cannot work the way I used to, but you know what? I do not mind, because I get to wake up next to you every morning and that makes everything else worth it. We are both getting old, Victoria said, squeezing his hand. But we are doing it together, and that is what matters. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped between them, and Victoria's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she was the luckiest woman alive. The next decade passed with its share of joys and sorrows. Kane's health began to decline slowly, his heart not as strong as it used to be. He could no longer do heavy ranch work, but he was content to sit on the porch and watch Thomas manage the operation, offering advice when asked, but mostly just enjoying the view of the land they had built together. Victoria's own health remained good, though she moved more slowly now, her joints stiff with arthritis. She spent her days tending her garden, reading to her grandchildren when they visited, and sitting beside Kane on the porch in the evenings, holding his hand and talking about their lives. In 1910, on a warm summer evening, Kane suffered a heart attack while sitting in his favorite chair on the porch. Victoria was beside him when it happened, saw him press his hand to his chest, saw the pain flash across his face. She called for Thomas, who ran for the doctor, but they both knew it was serious. The doctor did what he could, but Kane's heart was simply giving out. He was confined to bed rest, and Victoria rarely left his side, holding his hand and talking to him, reminding him of all their best memories together. "You remember that first night?" Kane asked one evening, his voice weak but his eyes still bright when they looked at her. "When I showed up with that cake, I remember every detail," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "You changed my life that night, Kane Sutherland. You gave me everything." "No," Kane said, squeezing her hand with what little strength he had left. "You gave me everything. You took a chance on a crazy cowboy with a wild idea about love at first sight. You believed in me when you had no reason to. You built this life with me, worked beside me, raised our children, stood by me through every hard time. You are the brave one, Victoria. You always were." Kane lived for another month, gradually growing weaker. Victoria stayed by his side through all of it, sleeping in a chair next to his bed, feeding him when he could eat, reading to him when he could not sleep. Their children came to say goodbye, and Kane spoke to each of them, telling them how proud he was, how much he loved them, how grateful he was to have been their father. On the morning of August 10th, 1910, Kane Sutherland passed away peacefully with Victoria holding his hand. He was 67 years old, and he had lived a full and beautiful life. Victoria sat beside his body for a long time after he was gone, still holding his hand, still talking to him, telling him all the things she wanted him to know. That she had loved him from that very first night when he showed up with a cake and a ring. That he had been the best husband, the best father, the best man she had ever known. That she would miss him every day for the rest of her life, but that she would never regret a single moment they had spent together. The funeral was well attended, the church packed with people whose lives Kane had touched. Ranchers he had helped, miners he had worked with, neighbors he had been kind to. Victoria sat in the front pew with her children on either side of her, and she held herself together through the service with the same strength she had shown throughout her life. After Kane was buried in the small cemetery outside Silverton, Victoria returned to the ranch that had been their home for so many years. The house felt emptier now, quieter, but it was still filled with memories of the life they had built together. Thomas wanted her to move in with him and Emma, but Victoria refused gently. "This is my home," she said. "Your father and I built it together, and I am not ready to leave it yet. I need to be here, where I can feel close to him." So Victoria stayed in the ranch house, tending her garden, reading her books, and spending time with her grandchildren when they visited. She missed Kane with an ache that never quite went away, but she also felt grateful for the 37 years they had been given together. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch in the chair next to the one that had been Kane's, and she would talk to him as if he were still there. She told him about the grandchildren, about how well the ranch was doing under Thomas's management, about the letters she received from Sarah and James. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, she could almost imagine she heard his voice answering her, could almost feel his hand reaching for hers. Victoria lived for another 8 years after Kane's death, remaining sharp and active until the very end. She saw more grandchildren born, attended Sarah's daughter's wedding, traveled to San Francisco to see James's work displayed in a major gallery. She lived fully and well, honoring the life she and Kane had built together by continuing to find joy and purpose in each day. On the morning of her 76th birthday, May 15, 1918, Victoria Reynolds Sutherland passed away peacefully in her sleep. Thomas found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Kane for so many years, a peaceful smile on her face. In her hand was the ring Kane had given her that first night, the simple gold band with the modest diamond that had symbolized a promise that changed both their lives. She had worn it on her finger for 37 years and had kept it close to her heart for 8 more, and now she would take it with her to wherever she was going next. They buried Victoria next to Kane in the Silverton Cemetery, and the headstone reads simply, "Victoria Reynolds Sutherland, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." Beneath that, by request in her will, they added, "She was loved." The ranch passed to Thomas and remained in the Sutherland family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they took a chance on love. The story of how Kane had shown up at Victoria's door with a cake and a ring became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the greatest rewards. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, two souls found each other again, just as they had found each other on that long-ago birthday when a lonely woman opened her door and let in the love of her life. The ranch house still stands today, over a century later, maintained by Victoria and Kane's descendants who remember the story of how it all began. In the living room hangs one of James's paintings, a portrait of his parents in their later years, sitting together on the porch with their hands clasped between them, looking at each other with the same love and devotion they had shared for nearly 4 decades. And in the small museum in Silverton, Colorado, preserved in a glass case, is a leather-bound journal that Victoria kept throughout her marriage. The first entry, dated May 15, 1873, reads, "Today was my birthday, and I thought it would be the loneliest day of my life. But then a cowboy I had never met showed up at my door with a cake and a ring, and everything changed. His name is Kane Sutherland, and I think I might love him already. Is that possible, to love someone you just met? I do not know, but my heart feels fuller than it has in years, and for the first time in a very long time I am not afraid of the future. I am excited about it. Whatever happens next, at least I will know that someone saw me, someone valued me, someone thought I was worth celebrating. That alone makes this the best birthday I have ever had." The last entry, dated just days before her death, reads, "I am old now, and Kane has been gone for 8 years, but I still feel his presence all around me. This house is full of memories, full of love, full of the life we built together from nothing more than a moment of courage and a leap of faith. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Not the hard times, not the struggles, not even the pain of losing him, because all of it was worth it for the joy of loving Kane Sutherland and being loved by him in return. To anyone who reads this in the future, take the chance. When love knocks on your door, even if it seems crazy, even if it seems too fast or too risky or too impulsive, take the chance. Because the alternative, a life lived safely but without love, is no life at all. Kane showed me that, and it is the greatest lesson I ever learned." And so the story ends where it began, with a birthday and a cake and a ring, with a woman brave enough to say yes, and a man brave enough to ask. Their love story became legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true love, when you find it, is always worth the risk.